The SEC is going to 9 league games, and the single biggest question resides in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. I'll explain. Welcome to Overtime with Matt Moscona. I am Matt Moscona, the host of After Further Review on ESPN radio stations throughout Louisiana, the host of the Locked On LSU podcast, and the publisher at LouisianaSports.net. Thanks so much for finding the channel. Please smash the like button and subscribe if you are new. So, finally, at long last, the SEC is going to adopt a 9-game league schedule, joining the Big Ten and the Big 12. We all anticipate now that the ACC will follow, bringing uniformity, finally, among the Power Four conferences. They'll all now be playing 9-game league schedules. The big question for the SEC now that they've agreed to 9 is, which 9 do you play? And we understand that the format will be 3 permanent opponents and 6 rotating opponents. So if you think of it this way, you'll have your 3 permanents, you'll play 6 home and away in a given two years. So over a 4-year period, you will play every team in the league home and away. I like that. Now, as we start this conversation, I hate permanent opponents altogether. One thing that I am very much in favor of is equitable scheduling. I want everybody to have as level a playing field, strength of schedule as possible. I understand that's not always going to be possible, and there are ebbs and flows. Even when you look at the NFL, for example, sometimes you have division winners that go 7-9, or I guess 8-9 now, that are going to make the NFL playoffs because they play in a bad division. But the concept being that everybody is paid, everyone's a professional football player, and so if you win an NFL division, you get rewarded for it. Similarly here, if we're all assuming that the Power Four are on a level playing field, which they're not, but at least you're getting closer when everybody plays the same number of Power Four opponents. But I would also like to avoid permanent opponents because it will allow itself for things that create imbalances in strength of schedule. We'll get into that in just a second. Now, that's only my personal opinion. I know that's not going to happen. They're going to have permanent opponents because they're going to try to protect historic rivalries, which I know some of you care deeply about. I don't. And admittedly, I went to a school at LSU and cover a school at LSU that doesn't have historic rivalries. LSU does not have a geographic rival. Like Auburn and Alabama are in the same state, or Auburn and Georgia have their rivalry, or Mississippi State and Ole Miss, or Texas and Texas A&M. It doesn't exist. LSU is the only Power 5 in the state of Louisiana. LSU has great history with a lot of different opponents, Ole Miss and Mississippi State and Alabama and Florida and Auburn. And I love many of those games and the tradition of many of them, but there isn't one that I look and say, that's got to be on the schedule every single year, which makes it really interesting how this is going to play out. Listen, college football has continued to thrive when Texas and Texas A&M didn't play for a decade. Texas and or OU and Nebraska don't play anymore. We've seen some great historic rivalries go away, and college football continues to thrive. The bottom line is, I don't care if Auburn and Georgia play every year. I don't give a rip. It's the Deep South's oldest rivalry. Don't care. And no one honestly cares outside of those 2 programs, because the bottom line is, let me ask it to you this way. College football fan, what are you more excited about watching in 2025? Georgia-Auburn or Georgia-Texas at Sanford Stadium? It's a pretty obvious answer there. And it's not the game that's the oldest game ever played, because nobody gives a rip who was playing on the field in 1892. It just doesn't matter. I want to see how Arch Manning does going to Athens this year. That's far more interesting than whatever Hugh Freeze is going to try to salvage on the Plains. Anyway, what's going to be fascinating is how they decide the 3 permanent opponents. And Greg Sankey was a guest on the Feinbaum show and said they're going to look at natural rivalries and then historic rivalries and then geography. So in the past, when this conversation has come up, one of the exercises the SEC did is they looked at an average of the last 20 years of conference results. And they basically drew a line in the middle and split the league in a top tier and a bottom tier. And the idea was, if you're in the top tier, you're going to play 2 of those opponents and 1 in the bottom tier. If you're in the bottom tier, you're going to play 2 of those opponents and 1 in the top. For example, Vanderbilt would play 2 in the bottom and 1 in the top. Alabama would play 2 in the top and 1 in the bottom. Here's where it gets tricky. And as we started, I said the biggest question lies in Tuscaloosa. Now, Nick Saban didn't like that model very much and spoke out against it, because if you play it out that way, the three most logical opponents for Alabama, naturally, Auburn, right? They've got the Iron Bowl, and it's one of the great rivalries in college football. That's not going anywhere. Number two is Tennessee. Tennessee, third Saturday in October, all that stuff, cigars and everything. After those two, the most obvious one is going to be LSU, because for the last 20 years, the LSU-Alabama game has been the most lucrative game for the Southeastern Conference. I understand there's been some ebbs and flows there, but when you consider when CBS had the contract, there was a decade straight where the LSU-Alabama game was the night game on CBS, the primetime game, and that has been and continues to be a game that's just planted in primetime every year, and look, it changes. When Alabama and Georgia played last year, it was a massive game. When Georgia and Texas play this year, it's a massive game. But on an annual basis, LSU and Alabama has consistently been the premier game in the league, and that's valuable for the TV network. So naturally, they don't want to see that game go away. So the question is, are you really going to saddle Alabama with Auburn, Tennessee, and LSU? The folks in Tuscaloosa are not going to like that very much. And Greg Sankey's explanation then, if you recall, was when you look at that 2-decade average, Tennessee actually fell in the bottom 8 because there were some lean years at the end of Philip Fulmer. You had the Derek Dooley years. You had the Jeremy Pruitt years. Now, Josh Heupel has gotten Tennessee in the playoff just this past season, and he had the great Hendon Hooker team back in 2022. But when you look at the average over the last 2 decades, Tennessee falls in the bottom half of the conference. So it satisfies that criteria. Now, I don't think this is going out on a limb to say that the league is going to look to maybe schedule favorably for Alabama. I know Alabama folks push back against that. And by the way, no team in the Southeastern Conference is immune to difficult scheduling, right? If you're going to play 9 league games, you're going to play a ton of really difficult games home and away. So nobody is immune to it, but nobody wants a more difficult path. Everybody wants at least some spot on their schedule that's a breather. But when you're looking at creating equitable schedules, like, for example, as if we look back at the old model with the permanent opponents, LSU's permanent opponent was Florida. Well, Ole Miss got Vanderbilt. Mississippi State and Kentucky played each other. Tell me as an LSU fan how that's equitable, that teams that you're playing every year get to play layups when you have to go play Steve Spurrier's Florida Gators every year. That was just for the entire decade of the 1990s, you just take a Sharpie and scribble an L on your schedule poster, with the one exception in 1997. So what they're going to do is, and you can do this exercise with me if you care to, but draw a sheet of paper and look at what you know, like what's a given, what games are going to be played. Like Alabama is, in my opinion, going to play Auburn and Tennessee. Those games aren't going anywhere. Auburn is going to play Georgia and Bama, so they need a third. Florida is going to play Georgia. Maybe Kentucky fits in there, maybe like Kentucky, Tennessee, but then if Tennessee's in the bottom half, does that make sense? Maybe Florida's going to play Georgia, LSU, Tennessee, or Georgia, LSU, Kentucky. It may go that way, but Georgia is the definitive for, like, you start there with absolute games going to be played. Florida, Georgia. Georgia's going to play Auburn, Florida. Mississippi State's going to play Ole Miss. Oklahoma's going to play Texas. Ole Miss is going to play Mississippi State. Tennessee's going to play Bama and Vandy. Geography in the state, they're going to play each other. A&M is going to play Texas. Texas is going to play A&M and OU. Vanderbilt's going to play Tennessee. You start with that. Like, those are the ones we know, given absolutely objectively, those are going to happen. Then you try to fill in the grid the rest of the way. For me, looking at LSU, I think Texas A&M is probably one that we're going to continue to see. I think Alabama is one the league does not want to go anywhere. And then I think it's going to be one of the Mississippi schools, either Ole Miss or Mississippi State. Now, look, LSU has played Mississippi State more than any other opponent in their program's history, but Ole Miss would probably be the more satisfactory rivalry game that they'd like to see continue. But we'll have to wait and see how it all shapes out. But each program is going to have to look at those different criteria to see, but they can't begin to fill out this grid until they decide. You have to start with Alabama because they're the only team in the league that has those 3 rivalry games that everyone wants to see played, nobody wants to see go away, but that would mean Alabama would be saddled with 3 marquee opponents as their permanents, and I don't think Alabama is going to be okay with that because they're going to want equitable scheduling like I do and like everyone else does. So until you solve the Alabama conundrum of the conference scheduling of the permanent opponents, you can't move forward with filling out the rest of the grid. We're going to find out in December when they have the schedule released for 2026 exactly what it's going to look like for the 2026 season. But my goodness, solving that Alabama conundrum is something that Greg Sankey and his staff are going to have to deal with first and foremost. Do me a favor, drop your comments. Let me know who your favorite team is and who you'd like to see as their permanent opponents in the comments. Please smash the like button, subscribe to the channel. Thanks for being here on Overtime with Matt Moscona.